Hi, welcome back to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a lovely day no matter what it is you're getting up to. Today I want to share with you some super achievable ring designs. I've got two in mind that I want to show you how to do today, and I firmly believe that anybody, even brand new to jewellery making or wire work, will be able to have a fairly good go at these. So if you'd like to join me down at the board, I will show you both of the designs we're going to look at just a little bit more closely. So the first design I want to share with you is literally the easiest ring in the world. These are little solitaire rings, infinitely stackable, uppable. You just cross them over like so, and you can wear as many as you can fit on your finger. So I'm going to create one of these, and I will be using 1.25mm gauge or 16 gauge wire to do that. So I'm just going to pop the other rings out of the way for the moment. Sneaky peek. Now I've got just under 4 inches of wire here, and it is, as I say, the 1.25mm gauge, and I'm just going to give that a really lovely warm through. You will need to make sure that both of those ends have been trimmed with the proper side of your flush cutters so that they're nice and neat and tidy, because you won't be able to get in there to file them down later. So I'm going to make those nice and toasty warm, and what we're going to do is set our size. Now you will, if you're making this to a specific size, want to work out whereabouts on the ring stick you'd like to be. However, what I find, if I form on this ring stick, I end up with flat sides to my rings. So I will always use my trusty wooden mandrel. If you wish to, you can put a little mark on there for the piece you're working on. So again, just under 4 inches of wire at the moment. It's about 3 3/4 inches. And I'm going to take that to the position that I want to work with and have that wire just encircling the mandrel at the position. So what you can do is just pop that onto your sized mandrel and see how you're looking. So that's a P, P to Q, P1/2, something like that, which is pretty good because that's my middle finger size, so that works for me. So what we're going to do is have a look at the gemstone we're going to work with, which today is a green onyx 5mm faceted round. I'm going to pop my circle of wire back on the mandrel for a second. What I want to do is make sure that I can fit that gemstone between the two uprights we're about to create. So one comes away in this direction, so I'll need to take a close look and see what kind of size we want to be able to fit the gemstone between. So that looks pretty decent to me. Might take that just a little bit further, and then you've got these two uprights coming away like prongs. But we're not prong setting today, we're doing something so much more simple. So you will want to just check that your size is okay there. If you wish to, you can at this stage apply a little bit of light hammering so that it's easier for your piece to retain its strength. If you prefer, you can pop that down onto a block. You could use a steel hammer if you preferred. It's entirely up to you. I've just added a little bit to stop it from wiggling around so much. Now what I'm going to do next is take these upright sections and pop them in opposite gentle directions. So I'm grabbing just at the nexus where that bend takes place. I'm going to push one away in one direction, flip the design over, and one away in the other direction. Now they're very, very gentle angles. It's no more than sort of 20-25 degrees there. What I want to do is to create two small loops on either of those ends. Now if you prefer, you can hold the form of the ring inside your pliers like so, and just roll the end of the wire around into a loop. For me, I'm going to pinch that with my non-dominant hand and just start to bring that round in quite a small loop until that meets back at the ring itself. So it crosses over to the shank, and I'm going to trim away the ends here. There we go, making sure that you cut the correct section. If you're very canny with your wire, you can add on your, I would say, approximately 8mm or so of loop, and you can make an exact measurement. I mean, if you were working in a precious metal, you would probably want to do that. So exactly the same on the other side. One goes in one direction, one goes in the other. You can kind of estimate where that's going to finish up draw that around and then push the tail down into position. You don't want them to be particularly large loops unless you're looking to support a very large round drilled gemstone. So again, placing very, very cautiously and then making that snip. And then what I'm going to do is take a moment to make sure that these are sitting equally and that I'm happy with the shapes. So we want them to be very, very slightly bowing outwards because today I'm working with a rounded drilled bead, but not too much. We do want those to be as close together as possible. We want to close those loops up as near as you possibly can. They don't need to be absolutely perfect. This is supposed to be an easy and pleasurable project. So again, if you want to, it's going to be slightly easier now. You could pop that back on the mandrel if that shape has come off slightly like mine has. And just give that a little bit of help to make sure that you're happy with the shape and form. So the next part, I've got some scrap 0.4 or 26 gauge wire. What I'm going to do is pop one end. This again is no more than 3 or 4 inches of wire. I'm going to take one end and put it through the first of those 2 loops, not through the second one yet. We're going to add on the gemstone to the wire. Now this has got quite a generous drill hole, so I would want to use the thickest wire I could get through the bead hole. So I now need that to pass through the second loop, pull those into position. Now when I pull this into the centre of the allowed wire, you'll see that that nestles quite nicely into the design. And what we're going to do is take one of those ends. Now you can see here you've got an open side this side and a closed side this side. We want to wrap the tail around the closed side and then a couple of turns around the shank of the ring. So on the first side that's a little bit loose because you've got nothing to hold it with on the other side. So I'm going to take that once, twice, I'll probably take that 6 or 7 times around. Just making those coils as neat as you possibly can. So that is 7. And then I'm going to take the very last little bit away and give that a squash down. And I'm not going to pull that yet because we need to make sure that this is going to sit firmly into position. So on this side, again, it's a mirror on the diagonal. So we're actually going to be going to the right again. You've got the cut side on the left of the screen, and on the right hand side, you've got the closed loop. So you need to draw that ring in together. Bring the tail of that wire all the way around the shank of the ring and then wind tightly. The same number of turns that you did on the first side. Pushing those loops, sorry, not loops, coils. So that's 4 and 5, 6, give that a squeeze, and 7 over the top. And again, we're going to trim away on top so that it doesn't scratch the skin. Now what we can do is rotate that around so that it's super neat and super tidy. How was that? That was what, 5 minutes? 5 minutes of making time. And you've got yourself a lovely little ring. So they're super easy. Also, you can make them with offcuts, which means that if you do make an error sizing wise, it really isn't that important. You can just take it apart and reuse it again. So in a moment, I'm going to show you the second ring, which is a coiled. But I've hammered that really, really firmly. Now you can go up a wire size. So I'm going to be working again with 1.25, which is 16 gauge wire. However, if you wanted to take that up to 1.6 or 14 gauge, then you don't need to hammer as much. The reason that I'm going to hammer this is because I want this to be strong. When I first started working with wire about 7 years ago, I used to make these rings all the time, but I never hammered them, not at all. And they were great for a couple of wears, but if you caught a shopping bag or caught the door handle or something, then they didn't really last very long, which was fine because it was all about experimenting and finding my feet. So I'm going to show you a little technique today, which is 2-minute make, something like that. And again, I'm going to be working with raw copper in 1.25 or 16 gauge wire. So I've got approximately here about 10 to 11 inches of the raw copper wire. And I'm just going to draw that between thumb and forefinger to try and get a nice straight start to my project. I'm going to pop onto one end with my round nose pliers, and I'm going to start by generating a coil. Now I've got a funny feeling that the wire I'm working with in hand right now, despite the fact that I laid it out on my desk, is actually 1.6 gauge, which is approximately 14 gauge. So it's going to be slightly tougher on screen than it needs to be. You can, as I say, work with the 1.25, which is 16 gauge. I just happen to have this to hand, so this is what we're working with today. So I've generated a coil that's gone round twice and then stopped. And what I'm going to do is exactly the same on the other end. Again, I'm just going to make sure that that's trimmed in the correct fashion. Now, I've got a coil going underneath on the lower side, so I want it to go over the top on the other side. And that's so that when they meet in the middle, they go in opposite directions. So again, quite close to the end of my pliers, draw that all the way around until you get your first coil. So this will be much easier with a 1.25. Got the first half going. So now what I'm going to do is continue a little bit further and look at all the space we've got to go around the center of our ring. Now you can work with a much shorter piece of wire and have a ring with fewer passes. So this one here, which I'm showing you the underside of, has got 2 passes around the finger for the shank, and this one has got 3. So you do have choices. This is a lighter wire, this is a heavier wire. They look really pretty. That's what we're looking to create. This is with an open coil. I've got some closed coils here. So I'm going to drop in now with my steel block and fairly meaty hammer. It's not an expensive hammer at all. What we're going to do is have a look at the amount of wire we've got and decide how many passes I want to go around. You can do some maths at this stage and decide if you want to measure exactly. I think I'm just going to close that up a little bit more. Let's say this is a little bit firmer than I would have anticipated. So I'm going to go another half a turn on both ends. And you can do that slightly more open coils if you prefer, or close them up as I have here. So I'm absolutely going to smash this wire now. So I want to get a really firm grip on it to make sure it doesn't flick up and twist. When you whack it, it does start to slightly come undone. So I'm just going to pinch that back into position. And you can see that's really starting to take a hammered finish to it. You can focus on keeping that as closed up as you like. But now what I want to do is start moving down the body, which will become the shank of the ring. I'm actually being slightly more gentle along here because, as you can see, I've started to leave tool marks, which is just caused by the edge of the hammer where there's an angle present. So I'm going to repeat exactly the same on the other end of the design, again pressing that quite firmly to try and keep it in true. So you will notice that sometimes I do miss with the hammer and get my fingers instead. I'm not overly worried, I have quite a high tolerance. What we are looking to do is to keep this section as straight as possible as we move through. You could very, very gently just give that a little dink on its side if it does start to wander. The reason it wanders is that there's slightly more pressure on one side than there is on the other, and that's human nature. We're not machines, it does happen. The more you practice, the more you'll be able to strike blows in a completely straight downwards fashion. So I'm quite happy with how that's looking. It's reasonably straight and flat. And what I'm going to do now is start winding that around my mandrel. I almost picked up the nylon hammer instead then. Oh dear. That wouldn't have been very good. It would have made a very large ring. So I'm going to go for a reasonably familiar size. Again, you could work with a different mandrel and make note of where you want that size to appear. Wouldn't be a problem. When you're hammering onto a machine steel block, you do tend to have a more satinized finish on one side, and then you've got your hammer blows on the other side. You can, of course, use that to your advantage. You may prefer to have a slightly more hammered look. Imagine a great big brass bowl from ancient times, something like that. Or you might prefer the look of the satinized finish. I'm going to go for the satinized finish today because this is raw copper. It will patinate all by itself over time. So I'm going to find the central point of that. You could use a ruler if you really wanted to. And what we're going to do is start to draw that around. And we want to be really cautious at this stage because we want those two wires to hit each other as they pass over the top of the mandrel. We want them to meet and be beautifully flush, because if you hurry it, there's one that I opened out on purpose and tried to close back up. So I did this to it and then pushed it back together. So you can see that actually once you've taken that too far apart, it can be a little bit difficult to get it back together. So although that's quite a nice ring in and of itself, it becomes a danger to what you are doing with your hands. So I'm going to pop that one away. And what we're going to do is focus on drawing these two tails around. Now, the bit that happens here is that the two ends don't match up because we didn't measure it. So what we're going to do is remove the mandrel, and then we're going to start very, very carefully drawing those spirals up. And it does take a little bit of grip strength. You can use tools if you prefer. What we don't want to do is lose that beautiful form we've created. I'm just going to put the pressure down from finger and thumb to generate a more open spiral. You can have that coming further away if you want to. I quite like them to be equal and opposite. So you can pop that. I don't know what size I've made it to actually, but that seems to fit okay. So that's probably around about a Q. I really like them. They're ever so much fun. And also if you've got little bits of scrap metal left over, it's a really cool way to use it up, especially if it's an interesting colour and you can't imagine having to repurchase a lot of it to do a small project. It's just a cool way to use up bits of scrap, to be honest. I'm going to briefly show you a piece that I made based on this design, which is just here. And all I've done is added a single one of those dyed green onyxes, I think it is, and then just done some basket weaving. It's exactly the same design, but with 3 passes of wire. This one hasn't been hammered, and I've just centrally set a gemstone into the middle there. So that's another opportunity to use basically the same technique, a little bit more wire, a little bit less coiling, and then pop a gemstone in. I hope you found these interesting. They are absolute beginners techniques, so if it's something that you've already made 1,000 times over, then apologies, but hopefully for people who are new to the art, something super achievable for you. I hope you have a lovely day, and I'll see you back here on the Gemhawks YouTube channel very, very soon. Bye for now.